Hey there, everyone. This is Gregg Schutze from ReadyForTheDraft.com, and this is the Ready for the Draft podcast, episode 35 of the 2020 podcast series, getting you ready for the NFL Draft. We're less than a week away, April 23rd, right around the corner. We're ready to jump right into the draft. I can't wait. And what's funny about being less than a week away, all the rumors really start circulating. You wonder how many of the rumors are actually, is there any truth to any of those rumors? Are there smoke screens? What really is going on here? Are teams trying to get another team to trade up? Are they really trying to drum up interest? Really gets to be interesting. Hey, you know what? We're really interested in this player. Is that true? Or are they just trying to get another team to potentially trade up to go after that particular player? A lot of fun that really takes place the last week before the draft. A lot of potential deception, and things that come into play. Like I said, smoke screens, and so any of the rumors or any of the talk that you hear one thing one day that a team's going in this direction, and then the very next day they're going in a different direction. It's like the Giants. I've been going back and forth in my head about what Dave Gettleman's going to do. Is it going to be Isaiah Simmons, or is it going to be Jedrick Wills, the linebacker or the offensive tackle? And yes, if you go Isaiah Simmons in round number 1, you can still get a guy like Isaiah Simmons in round 2. But in the event you go Jedrick Wills, the offensive tackle, here's another thought. When I look at the Giants, I really think that the Giants could be looking at, really shoring up that offensive line. I do think they need a pass rusher. I think you end up with, potentially, Jabari Zuniga there on day 2 is a guy that I think the Giants could potentially be interested in. Really with the Giants early on day 2, there are a lot of pass rushers that are actually out there, not just Jabari Zuniga later on, either in round 3. But I look at it and there are pass rushers to be had. You can get a guy like, Curtis Weaver potentially in round number 3. You could get Josh Uche out of Michigan. He could potentially be available in round 3 as well. So you could conceivably, if you're the Giants, go Jedrick Wills in round 1. Round 2, you can go center. You have an issue at the center position, especially with John Jalapeno and his injuries. Matt Hennessy out of Temple, that makes a lot of sense there. Early in round number 2, and then in round 3 you can get your pass rusher. I think there are some options there for the Giants. I think they can make some of these moves, some of these plays. The fact is the Giants, they do sit late in round number 3 because they don't have an early pick. They traded that pick away. So if I'm the Giants, then maybe what I do is instead of Matt Hennessy, I'm looking at making sure I get my pass rusher there with that second pick. And then potentially go safety like a Kayvon Wallace out of Clemson, who has all that versatility, a guy who can cover in the slot, one of the better cover players there for the Tigers. So the Giants, they can go in a number of different directions with their pick. And I think that's one of the things that really trying to debate, kind of going back and forth. And the reason why I bring up the Giants is we are talking about the offensive line in this podcast. What we're doing is getting ready for the draft. We're going to be talking about each of these positions. We talked about the skill positions, the quarterbacks and running backs, and then the wide receivers and tight ends. We're going to take a look at the offensive line today and really take a look at who's going where, who are the top guys that we're going to be targeting at each of these positions. Take a look a little bit at the history over the last few years at the tackle, guard, and center positions, and then we'll be talking about defense before I get to my final mock draft, which will be on Wednesday, heading into the draft there on the 23rd. So without further ado, we go ahead and jump into the offensive tackles. Let's go ahead and just jump right in. And, a season ago, we had 23 offensive tackles taken, and, 4 went off the board in round number 1. Jonah Williams, had the injury, but he's expected to be the starter there at left tackle for the Bengals. Andre Dillard really taken over that position at left tackle now that Jason Peters has moved on. Titus Howard getting playing time there in Houston. And then Caleb McGarry, the surprise 31st overall pick of the Atlanta Falcons. He comes off the board. He gets playing time. And what's interesting about the 4 offensive tackles is if you look through the drafts prior The last time we actually had 4 offensive tackles taken, we had Ronnie Stanley, Jack Conklin, Laramie Tunsil, and Taylor Decker all coming off the board in round 1 in 2016. And what's also interesting is you had 2 offensive tackles taken in the top 10, and the other 2 were taken in the top 20. And so that's a situation that we're looking at right now. We have 4 elite tackles in this year's draft class, and then there's a drop off after that. So what we're talking about is Jedrick Wills, the aforementioned Jedrick Wills, Tristn WIrfs out of Iowa. You have Andrew Thomas out of Georgia and Mekhi Becton of Louisville. And then after that, it kind of has a drop off, and there's a group of tackles that we'll get into and talk about here in a little bit. But going back to 2019, Jawan Taylor, Greg Little, Cody Ford, Dalton Reisner, and Max Sharping sitting there in round number 2 towards the end. They're both starters at the guard position, really looking good. Trey Pipkin's got a little bit of playing time for the Chargers. Chuma Edoga, Bobby Evans filling in nicely for the Jets and Rams, respectively. They came off the board in round number 3. So there have been some players that have already gotten to see some playing time. 2018. We said 23 tackles, only 19 tackles taken in 2018. And when you look at that draft class, obviously Mike McGlinchey and Colton Miller are the 2 that came off the board in round number 1. Brian O'Neill is a guy who I think could end up being the left tackle there for the Vikings, currently the right tackle. Orlando Brown, ran that abysmal 40 at the combine, but look, he's going to be a mainstay at the right tackle there for the Baltimore Ravens for a lot of years to come. If you go back even further, Garrett Bowles, Ryan Ramczyk. Ramczyk was taken number 32 overall. Now he's a Pro Bowler. That was a draft. Looking at it, Sam Tevy struggled this past season as a starter. He was a 6th round pick in that draft, though. Cam Robinson battled injuries with the Jaguars, 2nd round pick. But most of these guys were mostly guys that filled depth, and that was again the strength of that draft class. Only 15 tackles taken there. 2016, only 18 tackles taken in that draft, even though we were heavy at the top. Not a whole lot of depth to the position overall. So I think the league is really hungry for offensive tackles, tackles that are going to really make a difference, and guys that can make the team. I've got 20 tackles coming off the board, and when I look at the tackle position, I think I have some guys there as well that I think will ultimately end up transitioning to the guard position, but I got 20 coming off the board. I think they're going to be 5, maybe 6 tackles taken in round number 1, with another 2 to 3 coming off the board in round 2. I think there are some really good tackles, projects, athletes. They're really raw that can come off the board round number 3, and then from there, there's some guys that are scattered through there, whether it's injury history, playing at lesser talent that'll come off the board somewhere on day 3, but guys that I think can still make an impact at the next level. So tackle position, obviously, that's something that we want to focus on for much of this draft podcast. Looking at the guard position, the guards, that's another position that last season we had 12 guards taken, and we had 12 guards, that came off the board in 2017, and 2018, just 9. But we did have 2 guards taken in round number 1. And I mean, really 2018, for as few guards as we had, the depth at the top end of that draft, was actually pretty impressive. You had Quentin Nelson, the all-everything offensive guard. Isaiah Wynn, really a tackle there for the Patriots, but listed as a guard because of the fact that he was only 6'2", but showing that he can be an offensive tackle at the next level. Will Hernandez coming off the board round 2 to the Giants. Braden Smith coming off the board going to the Colts, guy that can actually play tackle for them. Wyatt Teller also gotten some starting looks there for the Bills. So 2018, even though, like I said, the depth, wasn't all that impressive overall, for the draft class at the very top of that group. I mean, you want to talk about a loaded group. That was pretty impressive. I look at 2016. 2016, we had, 17 offensive guards taken. And what's incredible about this draft is you had Joshua Garnett and Jermaine Ifedi come off the board in round number 1. But then the depth. Nick Martin transitioned to center for the Texans. Cody Whitehair, a center for the Bears. Joe Tooney, Patriots. He was a starter right away. Isaac Somalo getting starting time there in Philly. Let's see. Connor McGovern going to the Broncos. Joe Dahl getting some starting time there with the Lions. Wes Schweitzer, he's moved on to Washington, but he was a starter for Atlanta. Ted Karras, he's actually, I want to say he's in Miami now, but another guy got some starting experience and is going to challenge for a starting spot there with the Dolphins. So that was actually another draft class where you had quite a few guys that are still making an impact. This past draft, we had just one player taken in round number 1, and that's Chris Lindstrom going to Atlanta. Struggled with some injuries, and then only 3 other players were taken off the board in the first 2 days. Michael Dieter, Nate Davis, and Connor McGovern all coming off the board in round number 3. And Nate Davis really looked good for Tennessee, especially down the stretch in the playoffs. Drew Samia is going to get some looks there in Minnesota in round number 4. I think Phil Haynes is also going to be a guy in Seattle that's going to get some looks, as is Ben Powers coming from Baltimore. So guard position, 12 guards coming off the board, and you can see that, this has really been another position that's kind of been up and down. And I think teams wanting to make sure that they're protecting their quarterbacks. I think this is going to be a position that teams are really going to focus on. And I look at the guards, and I've got 14 guards that are coming off the board. I don't have any guards coming off the board in round number 1. I think round 3 is going to kind of be the sweet spot. I've got 5 guards coming off the board there. I've got Robert Hunt as my sole second round guard. And then the center position, the draft and the pivot, really kind of one of those things to where it really is kind of up in the air. You go back to 2014, you had 9 centers taken, none of them coming off the board in round number 1. 2015, you had Cam Irving going 19th overall to the Browns, but only 8 total centers taken then. 2016, again, Ryan Kelly going to the Colts in the first round, but just 7 centers overall taken. 2017, just 7 centers taken, and only 2 taken in the first 2 days of the draft. Transitioning to 2018, that was when we have Frank Ragnow and Billy Price come off the board, 20 and 21 overall. Really a deep draft in terms of the number of selections with 11. Quite a few guys that are still making an impact for a team there in the league. This past season, though, we only have 5. Just 5 centers taken. Garrett Bradbury struggled a little bit there in Minnesota. Elgton Jenkins should get some playing time there with the Packers. Eric McCoy, day 1 starter. Those were the 3 guys that came off the board in round number 1. I'm sorry, in the first 3 rounds, the first 2 days of the draft. So 5 total centers. I'm looking at this center class, and I think we have a chance to have as many as 9 come off the board. And so we're going to jump into that. I do have 1 center coming off the board in round number 1, 2 in round 2, and another 1 in round 3. And I think we've got some guys that can fill in some gaps after that. So let's go ahead and jump back over to that tackle position and really take a look at who we're talking about here. And I mentioned Jedrick Wills, and Jedrick Wills is a guy who, to me, I look at him, I look at his game. I think some of the pass sets are the best in all of college football a season ago. A guy who very light on his feet. I think he fires out of his stance in a hurry, meets the rushers on the edge. The lateral quickness is effortless. He looks like a basketball player in his stance, getting real low, bends at his knees, maintains leverage throughout the play. Very powerful as well, showing that he can unlock his hips, provide that initial punch, stuns his man. Once he's got that leverage and he has his man square, not only lateral agility to mirror his defender, but then is also looking to finish you. He has that mean streak and able to drive you into the ground. I think if he does get into trouble pass protection, it's because he overextends himself. When he's under control, maintaining a wide base, he can absolutely be dominant. Even if he is beaten, he has the skills to quickly recover. So he's a guy to me, even if he's out in space, I think he does a great job locating and locking onto the moving target. And what was really fun, if you got to watch Bama and Auburn play this past season, really looked to finish on the edge on a 6-yard touchdown by Najee Harris. This judo throw that he had on Marlon Davidson, who's a 6'3", 303-pounder, just really got under his pad level and threw him, which opened this gaping hole for a touchdown for Najee Harris. Now, Jedrick Wills, look, he is only 6'4", 312 pounds. The 6'4", not ideal height for an offensive tackle, but over 34-inch arm, so that's definitely adequate. And we talk about the 40 times. It's not really a huge deal because you're never going to have an offensive tackle that's running 40 yards. But he ran a 5.05 40, so he is showing off some pretty decent athleticism for a guy his size. Also busted off a 34.5-inch vertical leap, just 2 inches shy of the record that was set by Tristn WIrfs. Definitely a tremendous athlete. And look, if I'm the Giants, I'm debating back and forth whether or not I go Simmons or I go Wills. And yes, you could have Simmons there at number 4, but when you think about the last 2 drafts and who you've selected, you've taken Saquon Barkley and you've taken Daniel Jones. I think, if you go defense, yes, you're getting arguably the most talented or the highest ceiling defensive player not named Chase Young in the draft. But when you have a chance to get the number 1 guy at a position, that's going to protect your running back and your quarterback, that's got to be priority number 1. And I think Jedrick Wills, look, Joe Judge was an Alabama assistant. He's got a connection there to Jedrick Wills as well. I think at the end of the day, that's the direction that he decides to go. And then he can look at getting pass rushers and addressing some of those needs on defense. I think there are other ways to really address some of those needs. You really can't address it any other way than finding a tackle that's going to be able to get the job done both in the passing game and on the ground. Now moving on to Tristn WIrfs, my number 2 tackle, 6'5", 320, the versatile junior. I've got him going to Arizona, and look, ran a 4.85 40 at the combine. Everyone remembers that. Set the records, 36.5-inch vertical leap and a 10-foot 1-inch broad jump. Absolutely ridiculous. Look, only 16 of the 46 receivers at the combine jumped higher than WIrfs in the vertical. Absolutely ridiculous. And before the season, I remember Brandon Sheriff, doing the hang clean on YouTube. And what does WIrfs do? WIrfs shows up and puts himself on the map as this physically gifted offensive tackle, 450-pound hang clean that he made it look easy and did 3 reps. I don't remember if Sheriff was able to do 3 reps, but Sheriff now is a Pro Bowl guard with the Redskins, and I'm looking at WIrfs and I'm like, this guy's not getting out of the top 10. The athleticism is there. A guy who can play left tackle. He did so in a pinch. When Alaric Jackson went down to injury, I think his home is at right tackle, but he could also slide into guard. And I'm looking at Arizona. Arizona has DJ Humphries at left tackle, a guy who finally played an entire season this past year. He'll be the left tackle. You re-signed Marcus Gilbert for 1 year. He's not the long-term answer at right tackle, but look, you can have, if Gilbert's healthy, you can essentially play Gilbert at right tackle and move WIrfs to guard. And then that really upgrades your overall offensive line. This is a line that gave up 50 or more sacks in 3 straight seasons. Absolutely unacceptable. You have to protect your investment and protect Kyler Murray. And I think that absolutely is going to happen. WIrfs, the athleticism, absolutely on display. If you watch that Rose Bowl, the Holiday Bowl against USC, WIrfs was repeatedly getting out in front of the ball carrier, whether it was a receiver or a running back, and was the lead blocker, just really leading the way. The athleticism, in the passing game, makes it look easy, very effortless with his kick slide, very light on his feet. I like this pick. I think Arizona really being able to solidify that offensive line allows them to take a look at and move on after that. Also, getting DeAndre Hopkins. You've got Kenyon Drake. I think they're going to address the running back position probably, day 2 of the draft to get another running back to go along with Kenyon Drake. But getting DeAndre Hopkins was huge because that allows them to strictly focus on offensive tackle here in round number 1. So the next tackle, really, it's a big debate. Is it going to be Andrew Thomas? Is it going to be Mekhi Becton? I think it's ultimately going to be Andrew Thomas. I think, there's Mekhi Becton. There's issues with his weight. There's a flagged drug sample. Do the Browns really, want to go there? I know that there are a lot of people that are backing up Mekhi Becton, saying that, look, there's no way that he failed this drug test, a drug test. I know it might have been flagged. Zach Bond's test was flagged. The linebacker out of Wisconsin, it was flagged because it looked like a diluted sample. And really, he said he drank too much water trying to bulk up and add some additional weight for the weigh-ins to impress scouts. So, I would, reserve, judgment there, but I look at Andrew Thomas and, he was, to me, he's one of the more consistent tackles. And look, Cleveland, Baker Mayfield can't run for his life. And he can't develop as a quarterback, and a lot of people were giving him a hard time because he was fleeing the pocket and was heading left or right. He was fleeing and getting out of there, getting out of dodge. Even when there weren't pass rushers, he had time. He could step up. But the problem was his tackles were an embarrassment, frankly, and weren't really getting the job done. So yeah, if I'm Baker Mayfield, I'm getting out of there as quickly as I can. And so that really, played a huge part in his regression. Getting Jack Conklin at the beginning of free agency, huge signing, takes care of that right side of the line. But you need a left tackle. And I think that's where it's going to come down to Becton and it's going and Andrew Thomas. Becton, when I look at Baker Mayfield, what makes sense with Becton is Mayfield is used to playing, with a guy who is that big, 6'7", 360 pounds. Orlando Brown Jr., that was his left tackle there at OU. So there is some comfort with having a tackle that big, but I look at Andrew Thomas. He's a 3-year starter, experience at both tackle positions, a mauler in the run game. You got Nick Chubb, a guy, this is a guy who uses those powerful hands to strike, beat up anyone lining in front of him. He does get top heavy, locks out his arms and the upper body gets over his toes, gets him off balance, struggles sustaining blocks at times, but the agility, he has lateral agility in his pass sets when he's balanced and under control and not leaning forward. I think he gets depth to his kick slide, easily picks up the edge rusher, shows off a quick power step back inside to neutralize any secondary moves. Also able to reset his feet, anchoring with impressive leverage as well. Also has 36 and an eighth inch arms to keep the rushers at a distance. And when he's more upright, he can easily mirror the defender's movement. To me, I look at Andrew Thomas. I think he's the number 3 tackle in this year's draft. Browns make a whole lot of sense, which then means Mekhi Becton, consolation prize. You get to go play with the GOAT in Tampa Bay. This guy's huge. Like I said, 6'7", 368 pounds, just a massive, massive human being. And 7-foot wingspan, enormous size, allows him to engulf defenders at the point of attack. Kick-out blocks are legendary, just firing out of his stance, and showing so much power that he's driving guys off their feet, just throwing them around. And look, he's not just a big dude. Ran a 5.10 40 time. For reference, Dane Brugler compared him to Bryant McKinnie. And look, Mount McKinney was the 7th overall pick in 2002, ran a 5.13 40. So, Becton's in great company. I think his pad level can get a little bit high at times. And, that high center of gravity, he really has to work on his leverage. And, it's also, like I said, the issues with his weight and the issues with the flagged sample, that may be enough for him to slide just a little bit. If that does happen, then I think Bruce Arians would love to land his left tackle of the future. You've got Donovan Smith already on the roster. You need a right tackle, and that's that's going to be the thing that's going to be a little tricky. Is do you move Donovan Smith over to right tackle with Mekhi Becton there? I think in terms of the fit, and I'm still back and forth with this, I think Becton may actually be a better fit in Cleveland because of what Baker Mayfield is used to at his left tackle position, at least in college. And I think that Andrew Thomas actually fits better in Tampa because he has the versatility to play both positions. We'll see how things play out in the draft. That's part of the fun of things, that really trying to project where everyone's going to go. The only other tackle that I have actually coming off the board in round number 1 is going to be Josh Jones. And I have Josh Jones going to the Dolphins at number 26. Look, model of consistency in pass protection. Pro Football Focus noted just 18 pressures on over 1,200 pass blocking snaps. 45 starts under his belt. Athleticism, really relied on his athleticism more than technique. I think that will get cleaned up by the NFL position coaches, but fires quickly out of a stance, lateral agility, mirrors defenders, both on the outside rush, and can counter moves back to the inside. I thought his lateral quickness also on display at the Senior Bowl, showed really quick feet against the likes of Kenny Willekes and Alton Robinson, getting back inside on their counter moves. Also has a strength required to absorb the edge rusher's punch at the point of attack. Very active hands. Will lose his anchor at times. Starts bending at his waist, starting to lunge and lean a little bit. Needs to get that cleaned up. I think his kick slide is very effective when he does get a deep set and can take the proper angle to beat the defensive end to the edge. If he gets a shallow kick slide, that's where he can get beat at times. Delivers quite a punch, but the hands, again, inconsistent with their timing and placement. And I think that's one of the things, his feet will have to play catch up at times. And I think, position coach can fix that. The Dolphins, look, they traded Laramie Tunsil to Houston, ended up getting this pick because of that trade. And I think they have to get a tackle. Here's the one thing that could be interesting, especially if the Giants go Simmons. Could Miami potentially take Jedrick Wills with the number 5 overall pick, or even Tristn WIrfs at number 5, if Wills is off the board? Then Miami potentially at number 18 could get their quarterback, or package 18 and 26 to move up and get their quarterback, whether it's going to be Justin Herbert or it's Jordan Love. If they're not sold on Tua, that's actually what I think they do, or what they should do. Unless Justin Herbert absolutely is their guy. If they like Jordan Love, I think they get their tackle and then they package their 2 first-round picks, 18 and 26, trade back up and get Jordan Love. Again, things to think about, potential options at some point. It's going to be really fun and interesting to see how all this plays out. I think after that, you've got a trio of tackles that are coming off the board in round number 2. Ezra Cleveland, Austin Jackson, Isaiah Wilson. And for Ezra Cleveland, really a finesse tackle. I think this is one of the guys, he did put up 31 reps at 225 in the bench press at the combine. You probably saw that. Athletic tackle. It's really his lower body. He needs to work on getting that core strength. Can't skip leg day. He's a guy to me that ran a 4.9 340. Very impressive athleticism. And you see that his ability to slide, keep leverage. Very upright style, typewriter style feet, and mirroring is effortless. But he's got to really work on that lower body strength if he's going to be effective at the next level. And for me, there's just too much there in terms of development for him to be a first round pick. 6'6", 311. I still really like Ezra Cleveland. And look, I've got him coming off the board. Like I said, in round 2, and I have him going to the Jets. The Jets, I think at some point are going to get a tackle. I think what's critical for Joe Douglas is you get that number 1 wideout for Sam Darnold. And then if you're not sold Chuma Doga there at the right tackle position. You've got George Fant, who could play both tackle positions. I think Ezra Cleveland can come in and challenge for a starting spot right away. Austin Jackson out of USC, another very athletic offensive tackle, a guy who I thought played really well throughout the season, pretty consistent overall. The biggest thing for me with him going up against AJ Epinesa, when he fired out of his stance quickly and got his hands on Epinesa and was able to mirror him or drive him down away from the pocket, he was winning. He was winning, play after play, and I think it was really frustrating Epinesa. But the problem was he was late at times with his hands, inconsistent with the hands and getting that under the pad level. And it was one of those things to where he got overpowered at times by Epinesa. And when he didn't get his hands on him early, what Epinesa was able to do was slap those hands down, rip through, and set that soft edge, come around and get to Keaton Slovis. So I think there's still some development there out of him. Ran a 5.07 at the combine, 6'5", 322 pounds, over 34-inch arms. I like him to the Bengals, number 33 overall. And then Isaiah Wilson, again, if Isaiah Simmons comes off the board, number 4 overall to the Giants, I think Isaiah Wilson's going to be there for the Giants in round number 2. Mammoth dude, 6'6", 350 pounds, was the right tackle there at Georgia. I just, if I'm the Giants, I want to get a sure thing. I think with Wilson, I think he's a prospect that can only get better. But I think it's going to take some time. And, that's why ultimately I think it's going to be Wills is going to come off the board first. But when I look at Isaiah Wilson, I think there's no way he's coming off the board any later than round 2. And in my mock, if I can find him, I actually have him coming off the board to Miami in round number 2. And you're going to say, well, 2 offensive tackles? Absolutely. Absolutely two offensive tackles. I think they've got Julian Davenport there. Davenport's been an up and down, inconsistent offensive tackle. I think, you have to bring in some competition there. I think Josh Jones is going to do that. Then at the right tackle position, Jesse Davis is playing out of position. He's a guard and he's playing the tackle position. I think you need to really take care of whoever it's going to be playing the quarterback position. You have to take care of him there, and you get 2 tackles. I think, you're well on your way. After that, we're really getting into the next group. So I mentioned, through Becton, and then after that you had Jones, Cleveland, Jackson, Wilson. Then you get into the guys who are really the athletes, the guys who I think are really raw. A guy like Matt Pert, the Jamaican sensation out of Connecticut, 6'7", 318, ran a 5.06 over, almost 37-inch arms. I mean, this guy is massive, and pretty decent athlete, really light on his feet. What's really impressive, I compared him to Josh Jones when the Cougars met UConn, met the Huskies, and you saw just for as flexible as Josh Jones was, and the knee bending, I think Matt Pert really took it to another level. This guy can get really low and he fires out of his stance in a hurry. That leverage is something that I think he's really going to use to his advantage. And if you can just get some of that technique down, I think you could really have something. I'm looking at Washington. They need to figure out what they're going to do. Trent Williams, all of that. You get a tackle of the future. I really like Matt Pert going to them there. After that, you've got Prince Tega Winogo, another guy who very athletic, and moves really well, but the hands don't always match the feet. And I think that's one of the things that you kind of have to shore up a little bit. The Chargers, sitting there in round 3, they have Brian Bulaga, who I think is ultimately going to play right tackle. Sam Tevi, you need to have an upgrade there. So I think Bulaga moves there. And I think Prince Tega Winogo can ultimately end up being their left tackle. If you have to, you play Brian Bulaga at left tackle and Tevi at right tackle until you're comfortable with Winogo. But I think you got to get the tackle on the field sooner rather than later. That feels feels like it makes a lot of sense to me. Lucas Niang out of TCU. Another guy who, he battled injuries there at TCU, had the season-ending leg injury, 6'6", 315, really good length, athletic tackle, a right tackle, I think, as well. And for me, when I look at him, I'm, I targeted a couple of different locations for Lucas Niang before settling in Minnesota. And the reason being is I think Brian O'Neill, his athleticism, he'll ultimately be the left tackle of the future for the Vikings once they move on from Riley Reif. And I think you need to find that right tackle then. When healthy, Lucas Niang is one of the better right tackles in this draft. And so I think getting him in round number 3 would be a steal. And I think you really shore up that group there. Sadiq Charles out of LSU. Another guy who I think is very raw. There are times where the lunging and the leaning, you got to get that cleaned up. You got to really stay balanced. Sometimes his base will get a little bit too wide as well, get off balance. But he's 6'4", 321, ran a 5.05 at the combine. I thought he looked good at times in the playoff, against both OU and Clemson. There were times where he was able to take his man and effortlessly drive him away from the pocket. It's just one of those things to where get him to play a little bit more upright. He wants to bend at the waist a little bit more, wants to get overextended at times over his toes. That's where he can get himself into trouble. No question, though, he's a tremendous athlete. There are a lot of tools to work with. And Sadiq Charles, I've pretty much had him penciled in going to the Rams for quite a while. Andrew Whitworth, not going to be on the roster much longer. So that has always made a lot of sense to me. I think, really the Rams have to find a tackle at some point. And if I were to look at their board, that's really where I've had Sadiq Charles coming, going to them. I had him going number 104 overall in round number 3. Some people think he's going to come off the board in round 2. I think that's a little early to get a guy who still, is raw and needs to develop a little bit more. Give him a year under Andrew Whitworth's wing, and I think he may have something there for the Rams. Another guy, look, Ben Bartch, St. John's of Minnesota. This is a guy who tremendous athleticism for a guy coming from a Division III school. And he definitely did not look out of place either at the Senior Bowl or at the Combine. 6'6", 309. He's got just, he's under 33-inch arms. So a lot of people think that he may end up playing guard. I actually have him, playing the tackle position, and I think he's going to go to Seattle. And I think Seattle's actually going to take him in round number 3. He just feels like a guy that you can bring in. You've got Dwayne Brown there at the left tackle position. You lost George Fant. You brought in Brandon Shell. Is he going to be the answer there at the right tackle spot? I think Ben Bartch, the versatility to play both tackle and guard. I think he can end up being the tackle of the future if and when Dwayne Brown moves on. The rest of the guys, Jack Driscoll out of Auburn, a guy who I thought was pretty consistent there at Auburn. At times he outplayed Prince Tega Wanogho, in my opinion. I've got him and him coming off the board in round number 5, as is the case with Trey Adams out of Washington. This was a guy at one point we were talking about potentially being a first round pick, bona fide, hands down first round pick. If he could have come out after his sophomore season, it absolutely would have happened. But then he has the knee injury, has a back injury, and really, was slow to recover. I thought, he looked slow at times, was bending a lot at the waist. It just, the technique kind of went out the door, and it was really disappointing to watch. And really kind of frustrating, I know, for him as well. 6'8", 318, the athleticism, he just looked a step slower, just, wasn't as polished as he used to be. Ran a 5.6 40 at the combine as well, just 24.5-inch vertical leap. I've got him coming off the board in round number 5 to the Lions. I really don't know. He's one of those guys that's going to be a boom or bust player. Draft at your own risk. Same goes for Alex Taylor, the big guy out of South Carolina State. I think round 5 makes sense because he does have the athleticism. But if you watched him at the during the season or at the Senior Bowl, this guy's got chicken legs. He's got these little tiny legs, and so he's going to have to get into a weight room. He's going to be one of those guys that's going to need to put on some some pounds and really work. And he's 6'8", has the frame to put on some additional pounds. He's 308 pounds, over 36-inch arms. Ran a 5:09.40 at the combine, so there's a lot to work with. You saw the athleticism, especially at the combine, going up against higher competition than what he was used to at South Carolina State. I think there's potential there, but if you draft him anything higher than round number 5, you have to understand what you're getting. You're going to be getting a project. I thought Terrence Steele out of Texas Tech. I was always watching Travis Bruffy there at Tech, and I realized towards the end of the season that the guy that I really should be focusing on is Steele. 6'6", 312, ran a 5:03.40, showed off some pretty good athleticism there at the right tackle position. To me, he feels like a guy that you can take in round 5 or round 6, has that athleticism to potentially be a guy that could work his way into a starting rotation. Has some fringe starter potential, in my opinion, as well. Yasir Durant out of Missouri. I think this is a guy that's big kid, 6'6", 331 pounds. So he has the tremendous size. Could potentially kick inside to guard. Not overly quick laterally, and I think that's what gets him into trouble at times. But look, he was a guy that protected Drew Lock, protected Kelly Bryant, was one of the more consistent offensive linemen there for Mizzou. I think he'll be a late draft pick there in round number 7. I think Tyree Phillips out of Mississippi State, he's another guy that I think could potentially kick in and play guard. 6'5", 331 pounds, big physical dude, over 35-inch arms, and big old hands as well. A guy that's just going to lock onto you and really just drive you away. Not the most explosive in terms of his lower body explosiveness, just 25-inch vertical leap, and but for me, you put him inside at the guard position, and I think that's someone that can get the job done. And then Colton McKivitz out of West Virginia, 6'6", 306, did run that 5.35 40. This was a guy who looked like he was an all Big 12 offensive tackle, but if you watched him at the combine, at the Senior Bowl, this is a guy that was getting beaten left and right, just beaten like a drum by the speed rushers. That's really a huge concern for me. And I think that ultimately McKivitz is another guy that can kick inside, but I think he has a chance to stick with the team because of his versatility. Now, if we go ahead and move on to the guard position, again, I've mentioned that Louisiana has two guards in this draft that are going to get drafted. And when you think about Louisiana, you don't think about them being a hotbed for offensive linemen. But Billy Napier's doing something there with the Raging Cajuns. And Robert Hunt played tackle there at Louisiana. And then you had Kevin Dotson, didn't work out at the combine, but a guy that I think could potentially be a starter at the next level. Both very physical, and that's really that power running game that they had. You had Raymond Calais, Trey Regis, and Elijah Mitchell. I've talked about these guys a lot, and really it was a fun offense to watch. They had some underrated passing game. They had Jamarcus Bradley, the receiver, who's also in this draft, a guy who I think could be a late pick. More than likely is going to be a priority free agent at the receiver position. But I think with that running game, Raymond Calais, a little bit of an undersized running back. I don't see him getting drafted. He'll be a priority free agent, but I think Regis and Mitchell's going to be the guy of the 3 running backs that I think is going to have the most attention potentially in next year's draft. But Robert Hunt, he's big, he's physical, 6'5", 323 pounds, athletic mover, got injured down the stretch, wasn't able to compete at the combine. I really like him coming off the board on day 2. And there are a couple of different teams that have kind of had him plugged in with. I thought Carolina might be a nice fit. I thought Jacksonville at one point could be a nice fit for him as well. And ultimately, if I can find my second round selection, I just had it in front of me. I actually have Hunt going to the Ravens. So I think this is a guy, when I look at the Ravens too, I actually have the Ravens taking a guard slash center in round number one, but I think round two, I think they double up on the position. You lose Marshall Yanda. You've got Bradley Bozeman as your only guard with real playing experience on the roster, at least last year for the Ravens. And Matt Skura is battling injury, coming back from the patellar injury. Ben Powers has a chance to start at right guard. But I'm looking at it if you can potentially bring in Robert Hunt and Cesar Ruiz, upgrade that line, and then really Bozeman and Powers can battle it out for the remaining guard spot. Along with Stanley and Brown at the tackle position, you can really take care of your reigning MVP in Lamar Jackson. So then the next guard that I have coming off the board is Damian Lewis out of LSU. Very physical presence there. He and Sadiq Charles were movers in that offensive line up front. I thought Lewis was physical, 6'2", 327 pounds. He's going to look to maul you. He's going to look to beat you up, and those are some of the fun, the most fun offensive linemen to watch because they want to. The physicality is absolutely there, and guys who are they're looking to just grab a hold of you, plant you. And I'm looking at the Raiders as a potential landing spot for Damian Lewis, 81 overall. I think Richie Incognito is going to be playing there forever. So I think that Damian Lewis could potentially be that physical presence on that line down the road there for the Raiders. Jonah Jackson, I thought he was a model of consistency, not the best athlete. He's 6'5", 306, ran a 5'2", 340 at the combine. If you're looking for athletes, he may not necessarily be your guy, but what you do have is a technician, a guy who just always got the job done there at Ohio State. And look, you got to protect TB12. I mentioned they were taking a tackle in round number one. I think round three, you have to go with the guard. If I'm Tom Brady, I'm looking at it. I want Tampa Bay to really focus on protecting me and getting me more weapons. And I think that's what the Bucks do in with their picks in the first 4 rounds. After that, you can start looking at the defense, looking at some of the other positions. But first 4 rounds, I think that really has to be your target after that. Staying in round number 3, I'm looking at the Chiefs. They lost Stefan Wisniewski. They have some battles, with injury. Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, LDT, and Andrew Wiley battled injury there. Austin Ryder, the center, did as well. I'm looking at John Simpson out of Clemson. He's going to bring some physicality to the position. 6'4", 330 pounds. Another guy who's just going to beat you up. Plays with a mean strength, very physical, and a guy that can anchor at the point of attack very well. 6'4", 321 pounds, over 34-inch arms, which you don't always see at the guard position. I think he could potentially be a day one starter for them. So I really like that pick. And let's see. How about Natani Muti? A guy who I think every year, it's 3 years at Fresno State. He's torn his knee twice. Hasn't been able to finish a season, but if you put on the game against USC, when they played Fresno State, this guy was absolutely dominant at the guard position. And Muti's, look, 6'3", 315 pounds. Just keep him on the field. That's going to be the biggest question mark, if you're going to be able to do that. And I'm looking at Cleveland. I kind of like this pick because, again, Cleveland needs to shore up that offensive line and protect Baker Mayfield. You have Joel Bitonio at left guard, Wyatt Teller at right guard. I think they need some competition there. There's really no depth behind him. I really like this pick, and that's going to be a guy that could potentially be a starter sooner rather than later there for the Browns. If he can be more consistent, I think more than anything else. So then we move on to the guys in round number 4. And looking at round 4, what's going to be interesting, I think at least you're going to see some of these guys that are the polished guys, the guys that I don't think there's going to be as much fanfare. They're not as athletic, but guys who just get the job done, and guys that have the longevity to them. Shane Lemieux, I want to say, they're over 50 starts there at Oregon, 6'4", 310 pounds. Not the most athletic, but a guy who just got the job done. Very physical. A guy who can move a little bit in pass protection as well. And a guy who I just think a heady player, a guy who's going to be consistent. And I'm looking at the Lions. I think that's going to be a nice pick there. I think knowing what the Lions took Joe Dahl a couple of years ago. I think you need to get a guard in there that's going to challenge for a starting spot. Joe Dahl, Ode Ibushi right now penciled in as a starter. Josh Garnett on the roster. Kenny Wiggins as well. Bo Benshaw, either a center or a guard. I think at the end of the day, this is the guy that could come in there and potentially start for them. And I think Lemieux could start sooner rather than later when it's all said and done. Another guy that you're going to see potentially come off the board in round number 4 is going to be Solomon Kinley. He is a junior, but has quite a few starts there under his belt at Georgia. 6'3", 337 pounds, a mauler, a guy in the running game that's going to be big and physical. I thought Shaq Mason, when the Patriots took him, he was one of those athletic guards. But I think Patriots, especially with that stable of running backs, I think they need to get physical. They need to get more physical up front. I think Solomon Kinley could be a guy that can do that. So I think Patriots end up getting Kinley. How about Ben Bredesen out of Michigan? Another guy over 40 starts, 6'5", 315 pounds, technician, guy who works hard, very athletic. I think in terms of at least getting out and pulling, getting to the second level. You saw that a lot. He and John Runyon, inconsistent at times, but a guy who I thought was one of the more consistent guards. He's a guy that I think could potentially, he could potentially come off the board in round 2, possibly even round 3, but I think round 4 is kind of the sweet spot. And he's a guy that, there are a number of teams that he could potentially go to. So, Bredesen makes sense in round number 4, as does Calvin Throckmorton out of Oregon. 6'5", 317 pounds, played right tackle. He's really played every position, I think, there at Oregon. Had to fill in at left tackle when Penei Sewell went down a season ago. Also played center when Jake Hansen was battling injuries. He'll probably play guard at the next level, but look, his position was right tackle. He plays all over. Very consistent performer, not the most athletic, and that's what worries me about him playing tackle at the next level. I think he has to kick inside to guard, but his versatility, if nothing else, says, hey, he's probably going to end up being at least a 4th rounder. I think this is the right spot for him. 6'5", 317. I've got him going to Seattle in round number 4. So that kind of rounds out my guards in the 4th round. And moving on to the rest of the group, I think when you look at Kevin Dotson, I mentioned him, a big physical dude, really a road grader, 6'4", 321 pounds, very athletic as well. I think for his size, because this is a guy that can get to he can climb to the second level. Will get beaten at times with speed, but look, I still think he's a pretty athletic dude, and generated a ton of movement along the interior of that offensive line. I think Hakeem Adeniji is another guy that you really have to keep an eye on there at Kansas. Was a tackle for the Jayhawks. I think he's going to kick inside to guard. 6'4", 302, ran a 5.17 40, 34-inch vertical leap. Tremendous athlete. He's a guy, look, he could potentially end up kicking outside the tackle in a pinch, but I think ultimately guard is probably going to be probably the best case scenario for him. I think John Runyon is a guy who, he played tackle, and I don't think he gets drafted if he's just you're just keeping him there at the tackle position, but I think he can kick inside to guard. I think he'd be a very effective guard at the next level. And he's somebody for me that I've had penciled in there in the anywhere between the 5th and the 7th round. But a guy who, look, he's 6'4", 306, ran a 5.08 40, looked really good in the postseason as well. So I think that solidified his ability to get drafted. Kyle Murphy out of Rhode Island. Rhode Island's going to have 3 guys drafted in this year's draft. And I like Kyle Murphy. I've got him going to the Patriots. He's 6'3", 316 pounds. and played tackle for them. He's going to be a guard at the next level. I think there's no question about that. But this was a guy. When you talk about guys generating movement, this guy would lock on and just absolutely dominate his opponent lining across him, drive him down the field 5-10 yards before finishing his block. A guy that you have to watch him play. It reminds you of, if you ever watched the movie The Blind Side, when Michael Orr, the character playing Michael Orr, just driving a guy all the way down the field and dumping him, past the end zone and dumping him over the fence. That's really kind of what you saw out of this guy. It was reminiscent of that, because he was just taking his guy and just really just driving him down the field, and just wouldn't let go. Would just continue to drive him. Plays to the whistle, plays really hard, and I think he's a guy who has a chance to stick, because I really love his demeanor out on the football field. And then finally, my last guard that I have that's getting drafted, Tremaine Ankrum. And look, Ankrum has a chance to potentially be a 5th-round pick. He played tackle. He was a right tackle there at Clemson. I think he's going to kick inside to guard. He's an undersized player, and I think that's ultimately why he could potentially fall to the 7th round. He's 6'2", 314 pounds. Ran a 5'2", 140. A guy that look, he's intelligent. He has a lot of starts under his belt there at Clemson, and I think there are a number of teams that could use his services. And when you start talking about guys coming off the board in the 6th, 7th round range, it's kind of hard to get a gauge. Scott France out of Kansas State, a guy who wasn't invited to the combine. You kind of forget about him. He's 6'4", 6'5", 306 pounds. His first couple of years there at Kansas State, especially when he played opposite Dalton Reisner, I thought, this was a guy, playing against some of the elite pass rushers in the Big 12. He more than held his own, showed some really good athleticism. I thought, his tape as a senior scared me a little bit. This is a guy I thought that he regressed at times. But I still think there isn't enough skill to work with. And I mentioned him here with the guards, not the tackles, because I think, like Dalton Reisner, I think this is a guy that can kick inside and potentially give a team some of that versatility up front. And then finally, the center position. And I mentioned that I had Cesar Ruiz going to Baltimore, mainly because he's a guy that can play both center and guard. And I mentioned that Marshall Yanda, the eight-time Pro Bowler, retired. So you have Bradley Bozeman and then Ben Powers. And Bozeman really the only guy that has a starting experience. Skura, they lost him. He's in the last year of his deal here in 2020, but ugly leg injury, cut short his season, during week 12. So I think the Ravens get a lineman with some versatility. You can plug him in at guard right away. Depending on the health of Matt Skura, he could potentially slide over to center as well. Ruiz played 10 games as a freshman, started 5 at right guard, and then moved over to the pivot, started the next 26 games for the Wolverines. Technically sound athlete, always working to the whistle. I think that's one of the things. You see his head always on a swivel, looking for a man to block. Bends well, fires off the ball, low pad level. When he maintains leverage, very effective on his seal blocks, getting his hips around in a hurry, opening up a hole for the running back. Agility makes him a perfect candidate to pull as a lead blocker, gets to the second level in a hurry, but also very under control to make contact and lock on to that moving target. Whenever he gets his hands on a defender, he's looking to finish the block in the most devastating way possible. In pass protection, fires out of his stance again in a hurry after the snap, getting those hands, when he snaps the ball, gets those hands right underneath the interior lineman's pad level. Good initial punch at the point of attack, maintains active feet, has the lateral agility to maintain, make those mirroring movements look pretty effortless. But he can get his, if he doesn't get his hands on the guy, because if he can, he's going to sustain the block to the whistle. But if not, those hands don't get on there, he's susceptible to some quick pass rush moves. You'll see guys that'll use a quick arm over or rip through and shoot into that A gap and put pressure on the quarterback. He'll get overextended at times. He'll get too far over his feet. He'll lose leverage, causing him to get driven back, lose some balance at times in the running game. So he needs to work on some of that technique. But I think this is a guy who can be a plug-and-play day one starter. An ascending prospect, a guy who just continues to soar up draft boards. 6'3", 307. I think at the beginning of the season, everyone was talking about Ben Bredesen, but the more you watch Cesar Ruiz play, the more you're like, you know what, this guy's going to be a guy that's going to, going to end up being a player. Ran a 5.0840 at the combine. His hands were huge, measured in, 11-inch hands. He and, John Simpson, Alex Taylor, these monster hands over 11 inches. Guys that, when you have these big meat hooks, you're just going to lock onto somebody. And once you grab a hold of them, it's going to be really hard to for these guys to let go. So I think Cesar Ruiz, absolutely a guy that's going to come off the board in round number 1. And I mentioned Matt Hennessy. Matt Hennessy at Temple. This is a guy who could potentially end up in Carolina when it's all said and done, because I know that Matt Rule looks for his Temple guys. I think he's going to probably look for some guys that he coached at Baylor. I think James Lynch, the defensive end out of Baylor, is going to end up there in Carolina, probably in the 3rd round. But Matt Hennessy, one of the best pass protectors at the pivot in this draft, a guy who I want to say Pro Football Focus noted that I think he was effective on 98.2% of his pass blocks. Something ridiculous. I think he offered up only 2 pressures in 2018. A guy who, he's not the strongest guy at the point of attack, but tremendously athletic. 6'4", 307, ran a 5.1840. He's the guy who I think could potentially be a day 1 starter, a team that's going to bring him in. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think the Giants need a center. I think Atlanta, the Falcons, life without Alex Mack, I think that could potentially happen. And I think Denver is also going to be on the market for a center because Graham Glasgow probably going to play the guard position, and then you get the rookie to kind of be the center and get some help from some of those guys around him. I think Lloyd Cushenberry out of LSU, another center who is going to get drafted early. I think he'll be a 3rd round pick, 6'3", 312 pounds, really long arms, 34 and an 1/8 inch arms. You don't see that very often out of the center position. I thought he was the most consistent offensive lineman there for the national champs at LSU. I think he comes off the board, as I mentioned, I had him potentially going off the board in round 2, and I'm checking my latest draft board to make sure that is still the case. And I believe that is. Where'd he go? Because Cushenberry, I think he's another guy who could be a day 1 starter. Yeah, I've got him going to Houston. I think, with Nick Martin there, I think you can get a potential upgrade. Houston sitting there at number 40, put some, get some protection up front for Deshaun Watson. Cushenberry could end up being that guy there in round number 2. And I got Houston taking him number 40 overall. So, 3 centers potentially coming off the board in the first 40 picks. Round number 3, I think Tyler Biadasz out of Wisconsin started every game for the Badgers since his freshman year. A guy who is tremendously intelligent, high football IQ. Look, he blocked all 3 seasons for Jonathan Taylor, a guy who went, missed just, 23 yards shy of being the first running back to go over 2,000 yards in 3 straight seasons. And then after Bo Benshaw, David Edwards, and Michael Dieter all left, 4 offensive linemen total that left, because really Cole Van Lannon was kind of a part-time starter there at left tackle. He's working with a brand new line, and Jonathan Taylor still ran for over 2,000 yards. Some of that credit up front has to go to Biadasz, the one constant there up front. 6'4", 314 pounds, not the most athletic guy, but a guy that can still get out as a lead blocker, can climb to the second level a little bit. He's going to be very physical between the tackles, and a guy that I think, wherever he goes, they're going to want to run behind him because of his savviness, his ability to just shut guys down and really put some blocks there on the interior of that line. I think Denver, with some of that zone blocking that they normally do there in Denver, I think that'd be a nice fit there for Tyler Biadasz. So moving on from there, I think San Francisco, they need to potentially address that center position. And I think there potentially are some options for them. I'm ultimately looking at Nick Harris, because Harris has that versatility. I think he can play center, and I think he can also play guard. I think he could slide inside and take on that guard position, as a possibility for them. When you look at I think San Francisco is going to be the right fit for them, and San Francisco right now doesn't have a draft pick beyond before the fifth round after their first two picks in round number one. So ultimately, I think San Francisco is going to look to trade. I don't think that 31st overall pick is going to be one that San Francisco is going to use. So I think they try to trade. Into the second round, potentially into round number four as well. And I think round four is ultimately what they're going to do. Weston Richburg coming off of an injury. You've got Ben Garland as his backup. Ben Garland's over the age of 30. I don't know if you really trust him there as the backup. Tom Compton now is the right guard. Mike Person is gone. Tom Compton is a 1-year rental. So I think, depending on what happens with Weston Richburg, and Tom Compton's effectiveness there as that 1-year rental there at right guard. I really think Nick Harris could be the guy to man either one of those positions there for San Francisco. Harris, just 6'1", 302, did run a 5'1", 40 at the combine, shows off some decent athleticism, a guy who I think was the most consistent offensive lineman there for Washington, at least the last couple of seasons. That includes having Caleb McGarry, a former first-round pick, on the roster. I really like him. I think he'll be a guy that'll come off the board in round four. I think a guy that's going to be round four, round five range is Keith Ishmael out of San Diego State. The junior decides he's going to come out a year early. Another guy who I thought, model of consistency there for the Aztecs, 6'3", 309, started a ton of games for them. Not the most athletically gifted of the centers. But another guy who I think from a technical standpoint is a guy that's going to get the job done. I think a guy that has some versatility that's going to come off the board in probably the round five range, round five, possibly round four, maybe really let's just say 4 to 6 is Darrell Williams out of Mississippi State. I like his versatility because he can play guard and he can play the center position. Mississippi State, more often than not, he was playing center. That's really what everyone knows him as, is a center. And with Williams, look, he's 6'2", 304, decent athleticism overall. And a guy, like I said, between the fourth and sixth round just really feels right for him. Danny Pinter. Here's a name, out of Ball State, a guy who played tackle. He's played guard there for Ball State. I think he may end up playing the pivot when it's all said and done. And I think he's a guy that can develop into a starter. Fifth, sixth round range, more than likely, 6'4", 306, ran a 4'9", 140 at the combine. One of the more athletic guys, in the 3-cone drill, ran a 7.76, which was among the faster offensive linemen in that drill. In fact, I think John Runyon, let's see, no, Ezra Cleveland was the fastest, ran a 7.26. Let's see, Matt Hennessy ran a 7.45. And then after that, you had Runyon running a 7.57. But after that 7.76 from Danny Pinter, a guy that people were really talking about there coming out of Ball State. I think what keeps him from playing tackle are his arm length. Under 32 inches. I think he'll play either guard or center. I think this is the guy who can end up being an NFL starting center when it's all said and done. And a team could potentially get a steal there in rounds 5 or 6. And then looking at that center position at the end, Jake Hansen out of Oregon. I like Hansen. I think this is a guy who's an intelligent player, high football IQ, big, he's physical, not the most athletically gifted center. Another guy that I think is going to struggle from an athletic standpoint. But again, 6'4", 303. He did, like I said, ran that 5'5", 40 at the combine, but put up 33 reps at 225. In the bench press, play for Mario Cristobal, that physical running game, and a guy who I thought overall, even though he wasn't the most athletic, I thought he worked really well with his guards. They're on the interior of that line, and a guy who was one of the staples and the stalwarts there on that offensive line for the Oregon Ducks, and I think he ends up getting drafted late. So when I look at the offensive line overall, anybody else that sticks out that could potentially get drafted late, if I look at it, let's see if I can find anybody else. Justin Herron out of Wake Forest, knee injury, kind of cut things short for him. And then he came back, kind of the forgotten guy, but a guy who I think he reminds me a little bit of Justin School, somebody who isn't going to be overly athletic, but just, is a guy who was solid, for the Demon Deacons. I think he could potentially get drafted probably in the 6th round range at the tackle position. John Molchon, nobody's really talking about him out of Boise State. He's 6'5", 309, ran a 5'1", 340 at the combine. Physical dude, underrated athleticism. I thought he and Ezra Cleveland worked really well together. He could end up being a late day 3 pick. Michael Onwenu out of Michigan. He's 6'3", 344 pounds, big, physical, long arms. I think he's a guy who has late round potential as well. So those are really the offensive linemen that I'm looking at and really trying to target at this point. Zach Shackelford, the center out of Texas, he was another guy not invited to the combine who has a chance to get drafted. But I think we've pretty much covered most of the tackles that we're going to be expecting to see coming off the board. There might be a couple of outliers that I've missed, but I think we've covered the majority of those offensive linemen. So if you're scoring at home, I've got 20 offensive tackles, 15 offensive guards, and 9 centers. So, that's what, 44 offensive linemen coming off the board in this year's draft. Of the 250 plus picks, 45 of those being up front on the offensive line. It doesn't feel like a lot, but when we've taken a look at what's happened in past drafts, I think we're up on the number of guards from a season ago. We're up on the number of centers from a season ago, and frankly, if we go 20 tackles, you'd have to go back a little ways, before you actually find a draft where you had that number of tackles. Obviously, we had 23 in 2019, but prior to that, over 20 tackles taken. You got to go back a ways. We haven't had deep draft classes there at the tackle position. 2014, we had 23 tackles taken. We also had 23 tackles taken in last year's draft. I think we have more elite tackles up front. Guys that are going to get drafted in, the top half of round number 1. And then I think you'll see that drop off after that. And, if ultimately it stacks up to look similar to the 2016 draft. And I'm sure that teams that are picking Wills and WIrfs and Thomas and Becton are hoping that those guys look a lot like Stanley, Conklin, Tunsil, Decker out on the football field at the next level. So should be really fun, should be interesting, but we've covered all of the offense. We're going to transition to defense in our next podcast. We're going to look at the defensive line, linebackers, secondary, get you ready for that draft. And again, my last podcast will be my mock draft, final mock draft before we go ahead and kick things off on Thursday, April 23rd. So I hope you've enjoyed the content. Hopefully you've been sticking with us all the way through from episode 1 all the way through episode 35. If you're just joining us now, welcome to the show. Hope you've enjoyed the content, like I said, and hopefully you'll stick around for the next one. So for ReadyForTheDraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Take care, everyone. Have a great week. Let's get ready for the draft. I'll see you soon. Take care, and I am out of here.